Hanson, can we get the YouTube screen up, please?
Yep, we are now live.
Thank you so much. And can we
you.
get the screens up so that we can see our counselors that are joining us virtually? This is interesting. Just waiting for the screen. There we go. Wonderful. All right. At 5:01 p.m., I'm going to call the Wednesday, April 19th Quality of Life meeting to order. Loretta, if I could please get a roll call.
Counselor
Did I say-
Chavez,
Here.
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Present.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Present.
and Madam Chair.
I am present, and Councilwoman Villarreal will be joining us, but she did have another meeting early that is running late. So if you could just let us know when she arrives, that would be great.
Okay, thank you.
So moving on to approval of the agenda, do we have any changes from staff?
Madam Chair, I have no changes.
And any changes from members of the committee? And if not, can I get a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to approval of the consent agenda. I have that item D was pulled by Counselor Lee Garcia. Are there any other items that members would like to pull at this time? And if not, can I get a motion to approve as amended?
Move to approve as amended. Second.
We have a motion and a second. And Loretta, can I please get a roll call vote?
Yes. Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Chavez,
Yes.
and Madam Chair Cassett.
Yes. Okay, we have a nice and short agenda as everybody is in budget hearings, so I thought we'd keep it short this week. So we will just move right along to the item pulled off the consent agenda. This is consideration of a resolution sponsored by Councilwoman Villarreal, myself, and Mayor Weber. It is a resolution supporting the establishment of safe sleeping spaces as a shelter option for those who are experiencing homelessness in Santa Fe and for whom standard shelter options are not feasible, identifying an appropriate best practices and data-driven approach to sheltering this population, and directing the city manager to enter into or bring to the governing body contracts for structures, sites for structures, landowners willing to provide an area for the structures, and an operator or operators capable of providing round-the-clock support services and 24/7 supervision. We have Julie Sanchez, our Youth and Family Services Division Director, here to present. Councilor Lee Garcia, did you want Director Sanchez to make a presentation, or did you just want to jump into questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, if you have a brief presentation, obviously this is the first time I've, seen this. Obviously I've read through the resolution and everything, but kind of what's the nuts and bolts of this, and I think it's something that we've looked at that other areas are implementing. It seems to be working, but what gives us we want to make sure that this is going to be a good tool for us to try to implement and give people the option of having safe places to stay. So if you can just give me a rundown of what the intention is here and how it's going to work out.
I'm not sure we can. Oh, thank you, Tenzin.
How's that? Okay. Thank you, Madam
much better.
Chair, Councilor Lee Garcia. So housing and homelessness are very complex issues. We have been taking the last, I would say, probably 2 years to really explore different housing options across different communities. Safe outdoor spaces is one that many communities have implemented. It's an option for folks who do not have the ability to access other housing options, including congregate shelter, especially if they have pets or if they're coupled. And so it's something that is, feasible for us to explore as a community as an alternative housing option. As in the resolution, there have been successful models that have been launched in Colorado, in California, in Oregon, in Washington. And so we're going to be piloting, or the resolution is going to be in support to create a pilot SOS here in our community.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. So this seems to be more of a partnership with people rather than the city going and creating a outdoor space for people to stay. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's correct. It'll be a community partnership.
And so what would be the type of organizations that are kind of we looking towards to maybe partner up with to provide these places?
So Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, it's been really interesting. We're actually going to be releasing a solicitation to see who in the community is interested in both being an operator as well as providing a site. And we've had quite a few interested partners. So not only nonprofit organizations, but also the faith-based community has really stepped up. So I'm really curious to see, once the solicitation is released, who we get to apply.
Thank you. So in regards, it kind of seems like, just to say, for example, St. John's Catholic community, they have space. That would be maybe a partner that would say, okay. Then what would be the steps towards, is it sites that are provided to people for tents or pallet houses, or what type of, what direction are we taking with this?
So Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's a great question. And it is going to be quite the process. Everything from permitting to reviewing the land sites to making sure that there's enough electricity to be able to run electricity to each of the units, as well as site prep. There's also going to be, of course, wraparound support services that'll be offered 24/7. So there's going to be quite the checklist in order for a site to be considered eligible. And we made it a priority, of course, to include land use as part of our evaluation team, as well as other folks who have expertise in all of those different areas.
Madam Chair and Julie, if I may, I misspoke a little bit at Finance Committee about some of the questions we received. So I wanted to just take this opportunity to clarify and to answer your question. We are not looking at tents. We are looking at pallet shelters, and those are 64 square foot units that come in on pallets. They look a lot like tiny homes. They can sleep 2 people, and they're very well insulated. We would look at purchasing 25 of those with emergency management funds, because they're also usable in case for displaced people in case of fire or flood, and they have a long shelf life and warranty. So I actually misspoke at Finance and said that they were $7,000 each. They're not. They're $14,000 each, delivered, installed, and that's because they're so well insulated for our climate, as well as the fact that they have heating and cooling units in them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ochoa. We've obviously worked hard in the last year and 4 months that I've been on council to try to find places such as old hotels, motels, places that can be renovated. Utilizing ARPA funding, utilizing money from wherever we can gather money from. Have we, and I know a lot of work has been done in terms of outreach to people who possibly might be candidates to stay in places like this. And so, is there a sentiment that people will actually want to stay in these places? I mean, I know it's a whole different type of housing, which would allow people to have a little bit more privacy than just being in a shelter or in a hotel that's been converted or so on and so forth. And what kind of, I guess my question would be is the people that would want to stay here, are there rules to their stay? Do they have a certain amount of what's allowed, what's not allowed? And obviously, if they are to abide by the rules, they can stay. If they can't abide by the rules, I mean, what are we looking at with these?
So Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia, that's a really great question. During the pandemic, we saw that non-congregate shelter was the most sought out shelter option. And as Director Ochoa spoke at Finance Committee, Consuelo's Place, which is our non-congregate shelter, has continuously been filled with a waiting list of over 150 unsheltered folks. And so having these pallet units is definitely an option that I think folks would seek. We have planted some seeds with our park rangers to have them ask folks who are currently in encampments if this option was available, would they utilize it? And so far, we already have a wait list of over 10 people, including couples, people with pets, people who'd feel much more comfortable with their own locked door. And so I imagine that list is going to continue to grow as they plant the seeds of this potentially being an option.
Thank you. And I guess this is just leading me to questions, because obviously these are probably questions that may arise from community members when they learn that there may be a partner in their community that is interested in doing this. And I think the biggest fear for either people or businesses who live in those areas are, you know, the crime that happens around these areas. And you know, from a public safety perspective, how will that be managed? And again, you know, I'm all for trying to find solutions for people. I mean, I know many people who come to my business and they're living in their car, they're living in a tent somewhere out there in Caja del Rio, and you know, it'd be amazing to get them in to a place where they can stay, feel safe, and contribute back to our community in a certain way.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia. So to go back to your question, I apologize, I didn't answer it fully. Director Ochoa had spoke to this during Finance Committee. It's going to be a come as you are is our hope. Of course, it's going to be based on the solicitation and what we receive, but really, it's going to be behavior based, right? If you can control your behavior, if you're able to live collectively with other individuals, there would not be an issue around you being able to stay. There is, and I have Brittany Rodriguez here, who's my program manager, who specializes in homelessness, who could speak more around the Good Neighbor Agreement that's going to be established with every neighborhood within a half mile of the SOS. And that's really going to be a negotiation between the operator as well as the neighborhood to come up with what those expectations are. And there's going to be accountability both on the operator side as well as the neighborhood side. And of course, the city's going to be managing the contract. And so we have a piece in that accountability as well.
Thank you. So a good neighbor agreement, how does this good neighbor agreement come to fruition? Walk me through the steps. Let's say there's a partner that wants to do this and provide the housing. Then is it through permitting? Is it through just the step process requirement to send letters to people who are in the area? Kind of like I maybe an ENN. But obviously the people that are there are going to kind of want to know what it is. So how big of a radius around the area would be actually to notify people that are there in the area.
So Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia, so we looked at a 1/2 mile radius and I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, Brittany. You just tapped me on the shoulder. But a 1/2 mile radius in the neighborhood. It's actually written into the solicitation that there is going to have to be a good neighbor agreement. And so the way that I envision that happening is the site operator would be going out to every single house within that 1/2 mile, invite them to a community meeting, provide, even before this site is created, education about what's happening, as well as an opportunity to engage in what the expectations are. There should be a 24-hour hotline that folks should be able to access. There should be on-site security that's 24/7. There is going to be support services that are going to be 24/7 or as close to 24/7 as we can. And then there's also going to be things like maintenance, cleaning up. We're really going to try to make this space as welcoming to the unsheltered community as well as to the neighborhood surrounding. And so it's going to be up to both the neighbors and the site operator to negotiate what those are. And we as the city are just overseeing the contract. Maybe we'll sit in on those meetings, but for the most part, those negotiations really need to happen between the site operator and the neighborhood that's surrounding.
Sorry, Director Cho, did you have something to add?
Madam Chair, if I could just add, Counselor Garcia, one of the things that inspired us to go forward with this, and thank you to the sponsors for their vision in that, is that other communities that have tried these, especially in Colorado, have seen no increase in crime. In fact, some communities have seen reduction in crime in the immediate area around these safe outdoor spaces. And in terms of committing city resources, we can do what we can to provide close patrols when there's a problem, as we do now around certain problem areas. And we're 100% committed to, seeing this pilot be a success. It is a pilot, so, we'll have to, monitor it really closely. And 24/7 security is a requirement of the contract as well.
Thank you. Going back to the fiscal impact, and you mentioned that the housing is about 14,000. So is that a correct number? That's in the fiscal impact?
Madam Chair, if I may, since I'm the one who bungled that at finance, I feel like I should get it right this time. So yes, the fiscal impact is correct. For 25 shelters that are delivered and installed, the price is $375,000. So that's 14,000 and change, 14,462 per unit. And again, that includes, all the installation and I believe there's a 5-year warranty, but they tend to last quite a bit longer and have multiple uses. And the city would continue to own those, even though the operator provider for the length of the contract period would have them on their site.
And Director Ochoa, just to add to that, it would also include the electrical hookup kits, the collapsible bunk beds, mattresses, assembly, shipping, fire safety features, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, all of those things too.
Thank you. So this to me seems like kind of just like a bundle or a program that being put together for, again, people to partner with us, provide either the property or the facilities. Bathrooms and showers usually are on site on some of these places. Is that the requirement? Would be a requirement?
Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia, that's correct.
I guess this question would go to maybe Director Cook or for land use, because so what kind of zoning or would be appropriate for this kind of a place to be set up? would a zoning have to be changed? Is there a different criterion that would need to be met? In order to make it work, obviously? Would I have to come to the governing body or go to planning commission? Approval, is it done administratively? How does this work?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia. So land use is considering these temporary sleeping cabins. So it is a new use. And while the current code doesn't really contemplate it, it is possible to have these fit into the current code and work and be approved. So in principle, the operator or the owner that's working with an operator, they would have to be a religious or charitable institution. It would have to be within their charter to serve the community in the indigenous care or custodial care capacity. So we're talking about a charitable institution or a religious institution, a church, for example, those kind of uses. So where those are located, the zoning that those are located in, a residential accessory use permit is permitted by right is going to work, I would say, almost exclusively. That the only places that only zoning districts that might not work is like I2 and BIP, for example. I'm sure you're familiar with those. So we're not contemplating these being located in those zoning districts. So by and large, it'll be a residential, accessory use, and it again permitted by right. And then the use category will either be residential use, ancillary to the approved use, or other uses and structures customarily incidental to the or insubordinate to the permitted permissible user or use or structures. So one of those two permitted uses will be will be able to fit the operator and the owner in that property into one of those, depending on whether it's commercial or residential, what their current use is. And then we were just discussing earlier, we will want them to do a preliminary zoning review as part of the review of their proposal to make sure, before they're selected, that their properties will comply. And so I suppose a rezoning could happen, but I don't see that happening with the use categories that we're looking at, the operators that are being contemplated and the owners.
And real fast, just for the members of the public, I2, it's heavy industrial, correct? And BIP, it's business industrial park.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then again, just for the record, they will obviously have to remain in compliance with all the other, zoning criteria that are applicable. And the preliminary zoning review will cover things like parking, open space, lot coverage, those kind of things that we would typically look at, for any kind of project like this. But it under the accessory use, it would be allowed by right. It wouldn't be a special use permit or a development plan or anything like that. And then they would have to have the required toilet shower facilities, whether that's a mobile hygiene unit or something that's, provided by the operator.
Thank you. I guess just my last question for Lanis in regards to, because so I think each unit would end up having an electrical obviously to have electricity. I think that would be the only thing that would be needed. Because I think they were mentioning heating and air conditioning is going to be in each unit. So,
Right. Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I can speak to the building permitting side of that as well. So that's correct. They will have, my understanding is that they will have heating and cooling. I think Kyle Morgan could speak more specifically to that, or Julie or Brittany. But so these would be permitted under the provision in the IBC for temporary structures and uses. And so the certified building official, Bobby Padilla, he would have the authority to approve these for 180 days with allowed extensions. And also he's allowed to, terminate those at any time. I think that's a safety net, so to speak, with the situation as a quote unquote pilot project. And then under that same provision, temporary power is allowed. So actually all the design professional and the operator would just have to pull a trade permit for temporary power. And my understanding that these require like 20 amps a piece, 20 amps each unit. So, we're probably talking about a 200 amp service centrally located on a pole, in proximity to the compound, so to speak. I think it's pretty straightforward from a building permitting process for the electrical, and I assume the electrical will be run to each unit in raceways, that are protected, kind of like you see at the fairgrounds, et cetera. And then they would still have to go through all the building permitting processes. Engineer drawings, they have to provide engineer drawings, and we would issue probably a certificate of compliance, but they would still need to go through the building permitting process. I guess I can go, we're looking at the use classification right now, which will probably be I4, which is institutional group 4, which oddly enough is usually used for daycare, but not exclusively for that. It's, so it would allow over five people to be under custodial care for less than 24 hours. So the code, the I4 designation pretty much describes exactly what we're doing here. And then, we would just, review that accordingly.
So these being that they are temporary use, they don't necessarily require a property to have a certain density designation as far as the zoning code.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, no, the density regulations only apply to residential development.
But we are increasing, I guess, temporarily density on whatever property that
We're increasing intensity of a permitted use. Yeah. That's why we'd have to make sure that they comply with all the other, zoning regulations, open space requirements, et cetera.
Okay. And that cost, that's incurred by the person, the partner, the provider. I think this would be probably for Director Ochoa or maybe Sanchez.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that cost is, the amount that we contract the provider with could include funds for site prep as well as operations.
Okay. Thank you. In regards to the electrical, how it's run, is it going to be required to be like in conduit? Obviously, we want it to be safe. If it rains, if it snows, we don't need anybody getting electrocuted, and just for safety reasons.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I don't want to speak out of turn because I'm not an electrician, but I believe that if the conduit is a certain grade, it would not have to be in. If the conductor is a certain grade, it would not have to be in conduit. It would just have to be protected within a raceway, for example. But it could be run in conduit too, but that would be more expensive and a little bit unnecessary for temporary use, so to speak.
Thank you. That's all I have for Director Klug. One last question for Ms. Sanchez. So do we have interested parties that are already kind of maybe wanting to partner up with this if this passes?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia. We've had quite a few people come to us really excited about this kind of project, who really want to figure out a way that they can plug into and impact the unsheltered population. And whether that means potentially housing 5 pallet shelters or 25, they really want to see what a pilot like this could do for the unsheltered community.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I'd add that the Santa Fe Housing Initiative, the S3 group, which is a partnership between the city, the county, and the foundation. So in Quorum Foundation, Thornburg, and the Santa Fe Community Foundation. We meet with that group regularly. They have information on safe outdoor spaces on their website that may be helpful for members of the council, the committee, and the public. It's S3 Housing Initiative. And they are really instrumental in supporting a lived experience advisory board of people who've experienced homelessness, that are advocating for different options, as well as a volunteer group that is very interested in providing services should a safe outdoor space come to fruition. And they're kind of fielding a lot of those requests for more information or expressions of interest. We're staying a little bit out of that process because it will be a procurement process on the part of the city.
Thank you. I guess I have another question because you mentioned 5 or 25. So scalability wise, that's something that is an option for this? Somebody has space for 5 units or 10 units or 25 units. I mean, I think is that kind of where you were leading to with that?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia, that would be fantastic. Right now, we only have funding for 25 units. But if we had individual organizations that wanted to purchase 5 more to put on their property, because it's such an amazing initiative and we're seeing the impact, we would be able to support them in purchasing those units, should they have donated money or something.
And Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, if I could add, we might get multiple applicants and we'll just look and see what we receive. We may get 5 applicants that want to do 5 and we have 25. So it could end up looking different depending on what we get from the community in terms of what they can do. Of course, we do have limited resources for the pallets themselves, as well as for the service. And the service provision is not inexpensive as we discussed at finance. It'll depend a little bit on how much resource we have. But as Ms. Sanchez says, we're very excited that our foundation partners and the county are looking at this, very interested in supporting it. So if the pilot proves successful, we may have additional partners want to help fund growth in the area.
And I will just add to Director Ochoa's comment that right now the best practice is 25. So we would want to keep it to that number for the pilot project.
In other words, no more than 25. Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. I failed to, or I didn't understand if this was an administrative approval when it came to permitting, and I think that goes back to Director Klug. I apologize. Thought I was done. So for one of these projects to be able to be put up, is it administrative approval? Does it go to the board? Does it need to go to the board?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, it would be, in principle, it would be an administrative approval by the CBO. The inspections manager.
Okay, that's all I have. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions, comments from members of the committee? Counselor Michael Garcia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, team. Thank you, Director Ochoa, for a lot of the questions that I had got answered on Monday during Finance Committee when I was sitting in on that meeting. And I guess it'd be a good point to just reiterate something that you mentioned on Monday night, that this resolution is not proposing to put a safe outdoor space at Midtown campus. Correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's correct. That is not what we're contemplating here at all. We're not looking at that for Midtown campus or any other city-owned property.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that, just because I know there's been some confusion in the community and we've had to let the community know that that's not what's being proposed. We're not looking at it at the moment. Is there, because I was reading the resolution and it doesn't eliminate the opportunity to potentially use city property. With landowners willing and able to provide 24/7 security, hygiene facilities, and electrical services in direct partnership with social service providers. So ultimately, the city could fall into that category if we wanted to provide all of those services. So I guess my question is, why are we not looking at city property in conjunction with privately owned property?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I think that, we did a extensive survey, as some of you may recall, of appropriate city-owned sites for this, and Midtown Campus was the chosen site for a variety of reasons. But really, the other city properties where this might have been viable were not at the top of the list. So I think to have a landowner, a faith-based organization taking on the site would be very powerful for us. It's something that we don't have the resources to do alone either. And, a lot of these communities have large volunteer components to their organizations, which is, good. And they have on-site bathrooms already, in some cases, kitchens. So they have infrastructure that we don't have on a sort of open spot on city-owned property. So I guess if we needed to build that out and had more resources, we could. It just doesn't seem like the most realistic way forward at this time. I think, to be honest, those practical issues aside, we're really looking for guidance and, from the council, from the community. Is this something Santa Fe is willing to try? And we recognize that there are fears, there are unknowns. We look to the other communities that have been successful with it. We're inspired by them, but we have to make sure that it's something that this community wants and that the city is not imposing on the community, or the city staff is not imposing on anybody. The fact that the faith-based communities have been asking for this and advocating for this is very heartening to us. It means that we're not here in a vacuum coming up with some random idea. We think that the faith-based communities recognize that this is very mission aligned with what they want to do for their communities. And we're excited that that partnership may make it a success.
Thank you, Director Ochoa. I appreciate that. Excuse me. I think your response kind of hashes out or brings up a point maybe I'd like to be clarified, because from my understanding, if a private entity wanted to take this project on their own, they would work with Director Klug and go through the approval process. But would there be any mechanism that, for the city to step in and intervene, so to speak? Because I think I'm thankful that we have community collaborators that want to come together to develop community-based solutions to this community challenge. But looking at it from a different angle, and let's say the city stepped away and said, we're not going to do this. Would a private landowner be able to do the same, whether it be a faith-based organization, a for-profit entity and I'm just thinking, by no means is this realistic, but like an entity that has a large parking lot, because from what I heard on Monday, flat level spaces work best. So somebody like the mall or Walmart, somewhere that has space to accommodate that, they can take this initiative on their own without the city intervening and saying, nope, stop, right?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's a great question. My understanding is based on the zoning, it would have to be a faith-based entity who takes it on. But yes, that entity could, in theory, take something like this on, work with land use to launch it with absolutely no city oversight or involvement other than that involvement. We think this is actually a better way to go because we would have a contract with the provider. There's accountability based within the contract. Brittany Rodriguez will be monitoring the contract, making sure that, all of the stipulations around wraparound services, 24/7 security, hygiene, good neighbor agreements are being followed. And so that gives the city a role in ensuring accountability here. And I think that's positive.
Yes, and I was just going to speak to that. So thank you for really speaking light to it probably better than I could, because it really shows that because there are multiple players, it can't just kind of fly under the guise of the night, because there are going to be certain systems in place and with the community contractor, what was the specific terminology?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, with
The
the
neighborhood agreement.
good neighbor
Yeah,
agreement.
Yeah. So with that being said, I do got a question around the good neighbor agreement, just because, I think should there be systems in place where the good neighbor agreement is violated? I think on Monday you had mentioned that the city could pull back services. And I don't want us to put us, and when I mean us, I mean talking about the community as whole in a more challenging situation where we're providing these wraparound services. Something happens and the city says, nope, stop, we're going to stop. I mean, that could be detrimental to people's livelihoods. I don't want us to kind of just have a stopping point so I guess the question is, what mechanisms are in place? Because I know that, and I'm thinking back to like the agreement we've got with Pete's Place, right? Where there are several community meetings held throughout the year with community members. Folks are able to bring their concerns or supports publicly, and they're addressed. And I'm thinking, one far end of the spectrum, community supports it, fantastic, more resources are given. Other end of the spectrum, community says, hey, we tried it, we're not in support of it. What is the plan for us to continue providing support services to those who would be receiving them at the SOS? So, because I want to make sure we're setting the recipients of services up for success and not for some reason saying we're going to stop.
Would you like to take that? Okay. Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's another great question. One of the real challenges for people who work with unsheltered folks is finding them. And, although it was very challenging during the pandemic, and it stressed neighborhoods to have encampments, the social workers and the case managers said, I know where my client is. I know where they are. So I have to say that from day one of folks entering a safe outdoor space, providers are going to be recognizing that there's a long wait list, a big need. They're going to be hustling hard to find housing for folks. So, that's going to be something at the outset. But if, worst case scenario, the pilot wasn't working and we had to pull the plug on the services, which is, I think, what you're asking, of course, this wouldn't happen just overnight. There'd be continual contract management and, in meetings and engagement with the provider to hopefully improve matters, see what resources are needed. But should that happen, honestly, if clients, I think we'll have established relationships at least with people and service providers. So that's a positive, but it would be a challenge, I think, to ensure that those folks continue to get ongoing services, because the fact of the matter is, if you don't know where to find your person, you can't give them services. And we don't have enough. This is one component of a whole service array that we have gaps in, including a day services center, right? So I think the case managers are very good about having care plans and I'm not a case manager. So, continuum plans for folks. Again, that would, I'm sure, be the case. And, we wouldn't want anybody to fall off a cliff, as it were, but people are falling off a cliff left and right now. So that's the challenge we have.
Thank you, Director Ochoa. I appreciate that response. The last question I have is regarding the neighborhood agreement, or the good neighbor agreement. And I think it was mentioned that the city wouldn't have a hand in kind of facilitating that process between the potential landowner and the neighborhood. It does cause me concern, though, because we've got an investment, given we're going to be providing the pellet shelters, we're going to be providing the services, so we're a stakeholder, and I think it would help to show us good sign of faith if we helped to mediate that process, or we at least provided resources to find a mediator, because especially on an issue like this, it can become very contentious and very necessary to have somebody to facilitate conversations. And so could some of these support services provide those resources, a facilitator for these neighborhood agreement conversations? Because if not, it can get a little rowdy and out of line, and we want to make sure everybody is coming together with good intentions and we have the best positive outcomes as possible.
Madam Chair, Councilor Michael Garcia. So I think thank you, you make a really great point. But I think definitely in establishing the pilot project, we'll definitely have a staff liaison that'll be very deeply involved in everything from the Good Neighbor Agreement to supporting oversight, to doing pop-in visits as well as contract management. Kira had mentioned the S3 housing initiative. They also have an individual they have a group on staff that are experts in SOS that it would also be available to support the pilot site or sites in mediation and using best practices from across the nation to be able to support building that Good Neighbor Agreement.
And Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, thanks, Ms. Sanchez. The group that I mentioned on Finance Committee is Project Moxie. They're actually on contract with Incorum Foundation, and they have experience. They've presented, I believe, on safe outdoor spaces to Quality of Life before, and they are on contract to provide technical assistance to applicants for the SOS opportunity should the resolution pass and the solicitation be released. So we would anticipate that they would be play that facilitator role as well. But I absolutely echo what Julie is saying around staff being involved as needed. It's just that we wouldn't be dictating what that agreement needed to look like, because that really has to come organically from the businesses and the residents and the provider and the landowner.
Understandable. And I understand the expertise that Project Moxie brings to the table, but it could be seen as somebody that is with a bias or trying to influence the process in one direction, where having somebody with no interest whatsoever that is just solely there to facilitate the conversation between neighbors and the business. That way there's not any preconceived, you're going to facilitate this conversation in this direction, the neighbor direction, in the safe space direction. I think with the pilot program like this, we don't want any type of preconceived notions derailing the process. And we've seen historically, especially through the Midtown potential proposal, how folks can come out and really voice their support or non-support, and having a neutral party that has no interest in besides ensuring that bodies come together. And what I mean bodies, the two different parties, three, whatever, and the process, the conversations are facilitated through an amicable process. And so just to put that out there, in my community development engagement work, we would always bring somebody that had no real vested stake, right? Because it can be perceived by one party, well, Project Moxie is in full support of SOSs, so they're going to do everything to facilitate this process in that favor, or this community neighborhood director is going to do everything they can to make sure it sways in that direction. And we want to make sure it's a fair process. We give this opportunity a fair shake. I think we hope for success. It's my belief that it's government's responsibility to help those most in need. This is an opportunity to help those not only that are most in need, but that can break vicious cycles that are impacting folks, whether it be cycles of substance abuse, mental health issues, domestic violence issues. We, as a government, we have that responsibility to support those that are most in need in our community. And I see this as one of those opportunities. We just need to make sure we're doing everything we can to set it up for success. So with that, thank you for the question, the responses, Ms. Salazar, Director Ochoa. No other questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Garcia. Any questions or comments from either of the council members, committee members on Zoom? No? All right.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to thank my colleagues for the questions because I think it helps to kind of really get rid of the myths and the misconceptions and misperceptions of this project. And so thank you for the thorough questioning. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I have just a couple comments. I gave a much more thorough discussion of this at finance, but I think that it is worth always stating. With any public health initiative, I think it's not even moderating expectations. I think people frequently believe that, this is going to be the silver bullet that's going to solve this. And I always just want to make sure that people understand, as Director Ochoa had mentioned, this is part of this solution. It's part of our ability to address this problem that is, I'm not even sure I can use the word solution because it is such an intractable issue and one that has its roots in so many different areas. It's both the housing crisis, it is economic inequities, it is addiction and mental health and childhood trauma and all of these different pieces. And we really do need to be tackling it from a number of different areas. And so that said, I did want to give Director Sanchez the opportunity to talk to us about what evaluation means, because, you talked about evaluating it for success. And I think that it's important understanding what those benchmarks look like. And I am certain, I just want to say that when you say improve something, that does not necessarily mean erase something. And I think that that expectation is important. So if you could provide more information about the evaluation process to see if this pilot is successful and whether it is something that we want to continue investing and growing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Madam Chair. So for the evaluation of these sites, one, we're going to look at the cost benefit to the entire system. We're actually looking at homelessness as a whole and what it's costing the city, as well as everything from ER visits to jail utilization is what we call it, as well as how many folks transition out of the SOS into permanent housing and how many return. The other one too, that's a really interesting indicator is the amount of substance use, and if people enter into treatment, coming into a place of stability, and if they're successful in that transition. One of the things that Brittany and I have talked a lot about is, when folks do enter treatment, do we hold their space for them? Absolutely. We should hold their space for them because that's part of a successful treatment is having a place to exit back to when you complete that treatment. So we'll be looking at those pieces. We're also going to be looking at 911 calls. We'll be looking at crime rates, recidivism, all of the kind of indicators around if this pilot project is making an impact within those specific areas. And Director Ochoa, I don't know if you want to add anything else to
I
that.
just want to add, Madam Chair, that we'd also be looking at how the neighborhood feels about the project all along the lifetime of the project. That's very, very important.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then to that, again, coming from the public health field, sometimes what I've seen is that there is not enough investment in a pilot for the quote unquote dose to be high enough to see an impact. Do we think 25 is enough to really see an impact?
Madam Chair, that is the $1 million question, $1 million ARPA question.
Quite literally.
I really want, and me and Director Ochoa and Manager Brittany have really talked about making sure that we are intentional with the pilot project, really making sure that it works incredibly successfully before we scale up, that we have a toolkit and a model that works for our community and the folks who are unsheltered. And so if that means baby steps, then that means baby steps. But I would love to see in 5 years, 5 more villages across the city. I would love to see in 10 years for those to empty out. And we don't have that need anymore because we're so efficient and quick with getting people out of homelessness and into permanent housing that meets their individual needs, that we don't even need these kind of pilot projects anymore. But that's kind of my pie in the sky dream. And I have a lot of those. So
You and me
but
both.
but again, small incremental steps to make sure it's really intentional and it's really supported and that it's really working well for our community and the neighbors, as well as the folks who are seeking these services.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't think I have any further questions, but I do really want to thank this team. This is a really challenging issue. This is a very controversial issue. And I think the willingness to move forward with a new idea and really just understanding that we cannot continue to do what we are doing. It is not working. And so to find some other opportunities, to find some other solutions, to be looking across the nation, to find these evidence-informed programs and to bring them to this community and to implement them, this is not easy stuff. This is, as Director Choa mentioned at Finance, this is the most difficult to house population. I mean, when we are talking about unsheltered individuals, we are really talking about the hardest to reach. We are talking about individuals that probably need the most amount of services. And it is a lot to take on. So both from my professional perspective, as well as my counselor perspective, I really do just want to thank all of you for this work and for the work ahead, assuming that this resolution does get passed. So thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? And if not, is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second. The motion in a second. Loretta, may I please get a roll call?
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Amanda Chavez,
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Casas,
Yes.
motion passes.
Thank you so much. So that was our only item pulled off the agenda. Thank you so much, staff, for being here. Moving
Madam
on-
Chair,
Yes, Councilwoman?
I just wanted to know, I actually thought that I pulled item 6, oh, no, sorry. 6, what is it? Sorry, I'm trying to look through 2 screens here. 6B.
6B for the LIDA project?
Yes, and actually now that I'm looking at my email, I had an email that I thought I sent to Loretta and it didn't send, so I apologize. I'll ask my questions in finance.
Yeah, it looks like you'll have an opportunity to see it on May 1st. So get another shot at it. So moving on back to matters from staff. Are there any matters from staff?
No matters, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
No matters, Madam Chair.
And any matters from the committee? And I do not have any matters from the chair. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023, and at 5:59 p.m. we are adjourned. Thank you.